Let me just. Hi, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to start. I'm going to share my screen. I hope everyone's doing well and staying safe. Let's just. Okay, so welcome back. This time before I started, I just wanted to hear from some of you guys because I know I jumped in last time, and I just wanted to hear more from you guys. What are your goals for this course over the next few classes, and why did you want to take this course? Do you already know Python and are you hoping to learn more, or is this a new introduction? Do you know other computer science languages, or is this your first dip into computer science? Things like that. So if a person wants to share, or if you guys want to send it on the chat, I'll be taking a look at that. I think that would help me a lot. Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, it said my internet connection was unstable, so I thought maybe I'm lagging. Okay. Yeah, so if you guys want to, you can privately chat. If you go in the chat and then where it says everyone, just send it to me, or you can just put it in the chat. That would be awesome. So I can get to know you guys and then plan accordingly, especially with how I want to create like a final project when in wrapping up the course. And so also I wanted to know, did anybody get to try out the string challenges from last time? Anyone? If not, that's, oh, sorry.
No, usually Aditi, with online people are a little shy. They don't talk much. So probably chat or yeah, you can continue. And if somebody wants to talk, I think they should.
Yeah, okay, no worries. That was, yeah, that's the only thing I have to ask in person. Also, if it's your first class, that's totally fine. Basically last time I just went through beginning things, and I'll also recap a little bit this time as well. Okay, so there's one thing that I missed last time that I just wanted to quickly talk about. That's naming things in Python. And so sometimes you want to name variables, right? So like let's go to okay, here we go. So let's go to replit, and let's say you want to make an integer. So int x equals 5. Oh, sorry, actually you don't need to say int. X is 5, right? So x is the name of that variable. However, in Python, there are some things that you can't name. Like if I wanted to name it Aditi Patil equals 8, you can't do that because in Python, there can't be a space in a variable name, in one variable's name. It gets confused. So I've just made some examples, like you can include separate words as long as you include an underscore. So if I say Aditi Patil equals 8, that's allowed, that's fine. And then there are also some reserved words. These are words that have meaning in Python. So if you try to make a variable equal to it, it won't work. It says invalid syntax because and already means something in Python. In this specific case, and is how you check for logic, like 1 and 2, it checks if that's true or false. So this is just a list of certain words that are prohibited in using when you want to name a variable, and there are a lot more, but usually that's not a problem because the names of variables specifically have to do with what you're looking for. So like last time, we were trying to make a factorial, so we called it a factorial. Then I wanted to finish up strings. As we were discussing last time, strings in Python are just like a collection of characters, if you weren't here. And so last time we talked about a lot of, I don't know why I keep having to do this too. Okay, last time we talked about strings. Basically, you just declare them by putting these little quotes or double quotes. And if I want to print it, I just say string, I call string, and then it prints it. And so there's a really cool technique that we can use in strings, and this is called indexing. And it allows us to access each position in a string. So for example, let's say we have a string and set it equal to Aditi, like I did here. Starting from the first placement, Python gives it a number to keep track of each character. So A would be stir like 0, and we note this by using square brackets. So str and then in brackets 0, and then this would be str brackets 1, etc., etc. So to give an example, let's say, okay, so, and we can see that here, if I do str or string, I'll just call string 2, it gives us that character in the second spot. And so it's really important to remember that these spots are counted starting at 0 and not at 1, like we would conventionally count 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not how it works. Also, it's important to note that any spacing is also considered like to have its own spot. So if I have another string and I call its third spot, okay, so this is interesting. This is because, different versions of Python have different rules. So that's my bad. Oh wait, actually no, sorry. That's the 2 spot. I made an error. I started at 1. So 0, 1, 2, it gives that that space that's there. So that this is a really useful technique because it allows us to manipulate strings by accessing just a part of them. So we'll see this in the final part that I'm going to cover with strings, which is called slicing. And so let's talk about that now. Okay, so slicing is basically accessing a part of a string. Also, if anyone has any questions, please share them in the chat. I don't want to go too fast. So slicing allows us to call a subsection of a string. So the way we do this is through this formatting. So here B is hello world, it's a string. And then if we want to take a subsection of it, we start by using these square brackets, and then we call it using, so x colon y. So where x is the beginning index, inclusive, so we start at that index and we include it, and then y is the end index and we don't include it. So in this case, we start at the index 2, so 0, 1, 2, and we include that, and then we go until 5. So 3, 4, 5. So this would print LLL, and we can try that. So let's say hello is equal to hello world. And then we wanted 2 through 5. That would give us LLL. And so let's see another example, and I'll do it on this side so that, I don't know if I can, no, I can't clear. Okay, let's do it on this side so we can also practice writing in a Python file. So, by the way, sorry, if you weren't here last time, the way you can access this is just by going to repl.it, and then you press start coding, And this is a great website that I like. It's called Interactive Editor, and so you can basically edit online without downloading anything. You can also download Python, but I just like doing this because I don't even need to make an account. And so from when it says create new REPL, you will choose Python and then create a REPL. And this is where I was originally. So sorry if that was confusing to anyone who is new. So, and then also to explain, this is sort of like, this is where we write our program, and then here's where it executes and it shows our output. We can write in here in this right side. However, I think it's a lot more better if you want to write long programs in the left side, because this one just goes line by line. And so, okay, so going back, sorry, 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to give one example that we can do here, and then ask you guys, and you can tell me in the chat what you think would be the output possibly. Okay, so let's say we call it, let's call it string 1, and let's set it equal to Python. And so let's say we want to print the string 1. Let's do 1, 2, 3. So now I'll ask, what do you guys think that this would print out, given the example that we practiced? What do you think that it would say? You guys can put it in the chat and think about it for a second. Does anyone have any ideas? You can just write it in the chat or send it to me privately. So just to go through it, you start at the index of 0, and so P is 0, Y is 1, T is 2, H is 3, O is 4, and N is 5. And so we're taking the subsection 1 to 3. So that's with Y, 1, 2, 3. But it doesn't include 3 because that's not included. So we would just get YT if I ran it. And there you go. So that's just one example. If you guys are following along, let me know. And so there are a lot of cool things you can do with this. Let's say you want to take starting from a certain letter and then all the way to the end. You can also do that. So in order to do that, we just delete the number after the colon. And so what this does is it starts at the given index, so in this case 1, and it just goes all the way to the end. And so you would get Python in that case. Other thing you can do is start from the beginning and then end at the given index that you want. So you would delete this, and then let's say you want to go up till O, like not including the O. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would just give us the first 4 letters, Python. So that's really cool. there's a lot of applications for that in a lot of different ways and different functions. So I think that'll help a lot in your foundational learning. Next, I wanted to cover lists. So we briefly saw an example of lists last time, but I wanted to break down really how to use them. Also ask you guys some questions on how to use lists so you can really understand. So like I mentioned, there are immutable and then mutable data types. This is like really foundational in coding. So immutable basically means you can't manipulate it. You can't change it once it's been established. However, lists are mutable. They're mutable and ordered sequence of items of mixed types. So they can contain any type. Also, let me just, yeah, okay. They can contain any kind of object, and they're really flexible compared to other programming languages type lists, if you're familiar with other ones. The way we declare them is by saying the name and then equals, and then in these square brackets, we can put what we want. And so here we have a list of strings, and each element is separated by a comma. And if we print it, it'll show the contents of the string like this. And if we just call it, it would also print the same thing. And so these are the really important parts of a list that each part of this I'll break down during this class. So the first thing to know is that lists are ordered. And then that list can contain any type of objects. Lists can be accessed by index, similar to string, as you'll see. They are mutable, and they can be nested. What nested means is that you can have a list within a list within a list. And finally, lists are dynamic. You can grow or shrink the size of a list. You can also add new values or change old values. So let's start with what ordered and dynamic means. So the order in which you specify the elements when you define a list is an innate characteristic of that list. This means that in this example we see, calling a list A with foo, bar, baz, cucks, is not the same as saying B, which has baz, cucks, bar, foo. So even though they have the same elements, because they're put in a different order, these lists are not the same thing. And we see that when we try setting them equal. This double equals, by the way, is how you test like equivalency. Like if we wanted to say, oh, my bad. Oh no. Okay, sorry. Can you guys see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
So, like, okay, if you wanted to see if 2 is equal to 3, you would put double equals, and it returns either a true or a false. Let's say x is 4, and we make y equal to 2. You can say, is x equal, it's kind of like asking a question, like, is x equal to y? And the way we do that is by putting this double equals. Okay, so to continue, yeah, so that's how we check. Another way of checking is by saying is a B. That's basically what this says, and that's not true. Also here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is not the same as 4, 1, 3, 2, even though they have the same elements. Also, these two lists are an example of a list of the same type. As you can see in A, these are all strings. In B, these are all strings. And in this one, they're all integers. So that's allowed. Another thing that's allowed, this is another example, 2, 4, 6, 8. That's a list of only integers. You can also have different types. different data types. So like in this example, we have an integer, we have a string, we have decimal numbers. Decimal numbers in Python are called floats. And that's what they're called in most programming languages as well. You can also repeat elements. So in this list, we have bark, meow, woof, bark, cheep, bark. And those are stored as individual elements. They're not like called as one, which is really helpful. Anytime you need to repeat anything, lists in Python are great. And finally, they can be as big as small as you want, as long as your computer can hold that data. Next, lists are accessed by index. So this is similar to what we saw in strings. Very similar, actually. You call the index the same way you do in a string, by using those square brackets. And slicing is also the same. So here we have A is foo, bar, baz, kux, kooks, korg, weird words. And this is how the indices break up. So instead of like each letter getting a index, the way it works is each like element gets an index. So foo is 0, bar is 1, baz is 2, kux is 3, etc. And so that's really important to remember, because next we'll see how to access an individual letter within an element. And so that works a little bit differently. And so we call it the same way. If we wanted A of 0, that would be foo. If we wanted A of 2, that would be baz. And if we wanted A of 5, that would be korg. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like so. Okay, so like I said, slicing also works for lists. If A is a list, then the expression m and am:(n) returns a portion from A from index m to, but not including index n. So that's the same thing. You basically start at the given index, so 0, 1, 2, and then you stop and don't include the final index. So 3, 4, 5, you would only get these 3, which is what this shows. Another important part to know about lists and strings and any really like character data type in Python is called negative indexing. It's more of just like a handy tool. By the way, we'll practice all of these. And so basically it's accessing the list or a string, but going backwards. So it counts backwards from the end of the list. So instead of this being 5, you start at -1, and then this becomes -2, -3, -4, -5, -6. And so sometimes that proves to be very useful in specific circumstances where you need to go backwards. But yeah, let's just see how we can do that. So we can do that with strings as well. Let's say we wanted n, instead of saying, I don't know, counting, however, like maybe it's a huge string, right? And you want that last character. Instead of knowing how many characters there are in the entire string, you can just write -1, and that would be a lot easier. And so that just gives us the last character. And that same thing goes for lists. So let's say li equals hi world. And let's say we want, let's say we want this middle one. We can call it in 2 ways now that we've learned. We can call it as 0, 1. Or we can call it -1, -2. So we're just counting backwards, starting at -1. So you'll see that prints the same thing. It gives us that second word. So that's a really handy trick. Going back. Another way that we can call it is also by using slicing. So in order to slice, we need to a beginning index and end index, right? So the beginning index in this case, we want high. We want to include high. So we would start at 1. And we would end at 2 because that's the last one that we're not including. So by putting 2, we are starting with high, and then we're stopping before we even reach world, which is 2. And so this also gives us high. What's interesting, however, to note, and this is a little like complex, and maybe I'll be able to explain another time, is how when I call it just simply using indexing, it prints as just a normal like string as a word. But when I use slicing, it keeps it in list form. That's just something to note. You don't really need to understand it now, but if you do go on to learn Python, it is very applicable in terms of knowing what you're returning when you do a specific thing. Does anyone have any questions so far? Anything that I should explain or possibly go over again? I think that this is very similar to what we did with strings. So, okay. Yeah. Oh no. I don't know why that's. I'll just move it. Okay, so sorry. Next, I guess the animation didn't work. Next, I want to talk about nested loops. So this gets a little convoluted, but I will definitely write an easier example so that we can really go through it. And I also included a diagram so that it makes more sense. So because a list can have any sort of object in it, this can even include another list. So a list can contain a list. So this is really helpful in, let's say you want to make sort of categorizations, or you want to nicely organize any data. This could be really helpful because you can have a different sublist for each category. Like maybe you want someone's list of people's emails and then their addresses and maybe their phone number, things like that. So a list can contain sublists, which in turn contain sublists of themselves, and this can go on for any length. So this is one example. So let's say we have L equals, so we have our, let's see if I can like draw. No, okay, I won't try. Oh wait, I can. Okay, so this is our first list with these outer brackets. And so I'll draw to keep track. And then, so we have A, and then we have a comma, and then we have second brackets. So now we're into our second list. And then if we follow that through, this is where it ends. So we say BB, and then within that, we have a third list, which contains CCC, DDD, and then we once again return into our second list and then our first list. So this diagram helps make sense of that. So we start with the first 0th index, which is A. Then we go into a second or first index, which is B. That should be BB. That's why I was confused. Then in the second index, this breaks into a list of itself. And this contains what's inside this very nested loop. And so that's CCC. I'm just confused because I don't know why they like messed up the number. But yeah, it should be CCC, then DDD in the first place. Then in the second place, we put EE and then FF. And then we return back into the original list. So that was kind of convoluted. So let's come up with just like a simpler way. So let's say, let's keep this list, but instead okay, let's just take this out. So we start with hi, or maybe let's just keep it simple. So A. Then we want to create a second list. So we have B, C, ooh, not column. And let's close that to put a comma there. And then close off with D. Let's just make it like that. Okay, so basically what I was trying to explain, and I was getting confused about the letters, is that this is the 0th index, but whatever like sublist comes next kind of becomes one index that's kind of hiding these two elements. And so this is kind of like this becomes the first index, and this is the second index. So let's say I print li of 0. That would give me the 0th index, which is just A. Oh, sorry. Okay, wait, let me do it here. Okay. It might be that I had to import like lists or something. Okay, so, oh, I know why. Oops. I used the wrong braces. Okay, let's just put that back there. Print li of 0. Sometimes we make mistakes. Okay. Yeah, so that would give us A because that's the 0th index, right? What's interesting is if we put 1, see that's what I mean. So this whole thing becomes the first index because it's a list within a list. And then if we did 2, it would be D. So that's simple enough. The cool thing about this is, let's say we want to call just B. So the way we do this is we start with the bigger list and then we go smaller. And this goes for as many lists as there are. So if there were 10 lists, we would still go biggest to smallest. So the way we do it is we start with the biggest list and see the first index that we want to go to. So the first index we want to go to is here, right? We want this whole thing. So that's 0, 1. Then we go within this list and see which index we want. So if we want B, we want the 0th index. So this is 0, this is 1. So it kind of breaks down that way, and we just add it as another index. So what Python does is first it indexes the bigger picture and gets us to here. And then from this list, it indexes again and gets us B. So that's really cool. This can go on infinitely. So let's say in here we have another list, E, F. So now we have a 0th index. Then this is all 1, and this is 2. Now when we say li1, let's say we want E. So first we have to get to this section. We always start big and then go small. So in order to get to this whole clump, we have to start at 0, and then this whole thing is 1. That's why commas are really helpful. Just try to pay attention to see which commas are separating and keep track of the brackets, and that'll help you. So we want to start at the first index. Then we want to see we want to get to the E. So that would start at 0, 1, 2, because this is the second within those brackets. So you see how we're getting smaller and smaller. Now we're left with this, and if we want the E, we would do 0, because it's just the first element, so 0, 1. And now if we run that, we should get E. Perfect. So does that make sense to everyone, or do you have any questions at all? It's a little complicated, I know. We good? Okay. Yeah, so this is just a continuation kind of that example. These ones have the right outputs. So if we wanted L2, we would go 0, 1, and then this whole section is 2, right? So that's why it would print this whole section, because we're going from the biggest intervals first. If we wanted 2 of 2, then it would go 0, 1, 2, this big block, and then go to the second element of that, so 0, 1, 2. So we get this big thing. This is basically, yeah, this is very similar to what I did. So L of 3, for example, would be 0, 1, 2, 3. So we would get G. And if we wanted, and now this is also cool because this doesn't just stop at lists. It also can even go into the individual characters of the strings in a list. So for example, L of 2, 0, 1. So we start with 2. 2 is 0, 1, 2. So we get this big one here. Now we go to the 0th element of that. So that's CC. And then we go to the first element of that. So like we did string indexing before, we would do 0, 1. So we would literally get this character C. And I can also show that to you guys here. So let's say this is EE instead, or EF instead. You'll see that now it'll choose, oh wait, I have to actually, so LI1 would take us to this one. Then LI1, 2 would take us to 0, 1, 2, 2. And then 1, 2, 0 would take us to this element. And then if we take the 0th element of that, we would just get an E. But if I change it to 1, we would get this F. Let me make it a Z to make it easier. See, so it can literally take subsections of a string. This is more complicated for like integers or numbers or something. So right now, let's just focus on strings. So that's also another really cool thing about Python that comes handy. Okay, so let's just do a little quiz on lists. You guys can write me in the chat, or you can also just think about it, and then I can also explain it afterwards if you guys don't want to. Okay. So here we have colors. Colors is a list, as we see. It has red, green, burnt sienna, and blue. And then we call colors of 2. So the question is, what will the output of colors 2 expression be? And just to say, a runtime error just means like it gives that red error, you know, it doesn't properly give any output. So what do you guys think?
The first one, burnt sienna?
Yeah, that's correct. Next time, yeah, let's just give a few seconds or a minute to think about. But yeah, that's perfect because it goes 0, 1, 2, and then it selects that entire string.
When you were explaining, you were giving with single quotes, but this is double quotes. Is that okay?
Yeah, so that's the cool thing about strings in Python. It doesn't matter what you use. Oops, sorry. I just like using single quotes because it's easier, but it doesn't actually make a difference. So you can call strings this way as well, and you'll see it does the same thing. Z, or if you take all this out, it'll give
BC.
Yeah. So you see, they kind of like know what it is already, and they even change it to single quotes, which is interesting. But yeah, it doesn't matter which you choose. It's cool. Okay, so I think there's one more question on string lists. Okay, so this one isn't multiple choice. It's the same list, and it's asking which index would give would select the
Colors
value red
0,
from the list.
colors of 0.
Yeah. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so let's just move on. Yeah, so it's colors of 0. Okay, so this one is a little more complicated. Let's take some time and we can do it together as well. So this kind of goes through the nested loops that we were talking about. And this is a diagram for it to help you out. So what is the expression that returns the Z in Baz? So this is Baz that we see here. So let's just think about it for a minute.
X of X1 to 0. No. So X of 0, 1. Okay, X of 1 inside 1. 1, 1. Three, 1, 1, 3. X of 1, 1, 3.
Okay, so that's close. Let's break it down. I'll draw on here. Okay, so we start with 0. Oh, that's not a good color. Let's see. Okay, so this is 0. We don't want that, right? We want the Z in Baz. We want this guy here. And then we have this whole thing
as 1,
which is 1, and this is 2, right?
2.
So
X
first,
of 1.
First, this is so ugly. First, we're going into the 1 because that makes sense, right? Baz is within that. Then within that,
another 1.
So yeah, within that we started 0, 1, and then this whole thing is 2, right?
Okay.
So yeah, that was the error. So this becomes
2.
2.
Never mind.
Then
2 again.
We started 0, and this is 1, and so we want 1. Does that make sense?
Correct.
Yeah.
And then in that one 3. So 1, 2, 1, 3. Okay.
Yeah.
I forgot that.
Not 3. Sorry. 0, 1, 2.
Oh, every time it starts from 0.
Yeah, it always starts from 0. So it's a little convoluted.
Understood.
Basically, yeah. So it always starts from 0, even within a word. So
Understood.
that's why let me write it here. So, so Baz. So this is a 0, this is a 1, and this is a 2, even when it's a string. So that's a cool thing, and it's an important thing to remember in Python. It always starts indexing from 0. Let me just erase that. And we see that here. So it explains the same thing. And it also has negative indexes, but let's ignore that. It basically breaks down into each list. Okay, so finally, I just want to talk about tuples real quick. Tuples are really similar to lists. So everything that we've learned basically almost applies the same. They're ordered. You can access them by index. And, oh, sorry, someone's not muted. I'm just going to mute them. Oh, okay, never mind. So, yeah, so tuples are very similar, except they are immutable. So this means you can't add to them or delete parts of them or change items after a tuple is defined. They're also defined by using parentheses rather than those square brackets. So those are the two big differences, really. So this is an example of creating a tuple. This one is filled with strings. Like lists, they can be of any type. It doesn't matter. And also important to notice is, although you define them using parentheses, you still use the square brackets when you want to index them. However, so here, for example, t of 0, it's still foo. It still indexes the same way, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. T of -1 is still the last element. Also, you can't modify tuples. This is what I mean. So for example, you have t equal to that, right? And let's say you want to set the second element to bark instead of Baz. It gives you an error, and it says tuple object does not support item assignment. This means you can't assign something in the tuple to a new value. So let's look at that here. Let's say I have this list, right? Let's just take this out because this is too much. Let's just make it a simple list. So let's say I wanted to change B to a Z. All I would do is I have to call the index and set it equal to what I want it to say now. Now when I print li, this value will have changed, you see. So now it says Z instead of B. But now let's say that we have a tuple, and we can fill it with the same exact things. A, B, C, D, except we now use these parentheses. If I try to say a tuple of 1 is equal to Z, and then print 2, it'll give me an error. So yeah, it's mad that I did that. Yeah, so that's just not allowed. It's just one of the rules. But yeah, that's just me printing it out regularly. That's how it looks. And you can also print out each index like I was showing earlier. So 0 would print out A. And then finally, if you want to create a tuple of one object, you use a comma. Or wait, I think I have one. Yeah. So the reason why we do this is because, as you can see here, when you, oops, sorry. So here, this is how we declare a tuple, right? We use parentheses and commas in between. This one is with integers, so we don't use those quotes. So we ask Python, what type is this? And it tells us it's a tuple, right? But let's say you made a tuple of one object. If you just put parentheses, Python's gonna think that's an integer, because the parentheses by itself with just one instance doesn't really mean anything. So if you want to specify that it's a tuple with just one object in it, you have to use a comma. So this this applies to like anything. Let's say I just had A and then I said print type 2. It tells me that it's a string because these parentheses just by itself don't mean anything. It's the same as just writing this. However, if I put the comma, is it running? It looks frozen. Oh no. Let me refresh it. Technical difficulties. But yeah, basically, if I put the comma, then it'll recognize that it's a tuple. Okay, so my computer is like lagging a little bit, so I'm just gonna keep going because we don't have a lot of time. Oops. Okay, so why would we choose a tuple over a list? Because it sounds like tuples are almost the same, but they're like a little harder to use, right? Because now we can't change anything. However, sometimes you don't want data to be modified. If the values are supposed to stay constant, then using a tuple protects you from these accidental changes, or maybe you try to change someone try to change something, it won't allow them to. Also, programs run faster when manipulating a tuple than a list. This mostly is only noticeable when you have really big tuples or lists. This is also a great example of why Python is used in data. Let's say you had a list of people's usernames and passwords. No, well, not a list. Like that would be great to be using a tuple, right? Because you wouldn't want to manipulate someone's password or username. And so it would be great to use a tuple in that case. Also, tuples can be used for dictionaries, whereas a list can't be. We'll talk about that next time. That will be like one of the other important data types to go over before working on creating like a mini project. So yeah, these are all reasons why. And so I'll just close off with just a few questions about tuples to see what you guys have picked up. So how do you assign a tuple of length 1 to the variable a? There are multiple, or there can be multiple answers to this. So what do you guys think?
The first one and third one.
So a tuple needs a parentheses. So I didn't mention the first one. The first one actually doesn't exist. So maybe try again.
The third one?
So the third one, this one, right? That one is just setting a equal to 1. So Python is kind of like, it kind of does the easiest thing possible. So when it sees a 1, the first thing it thinks of is it's a number, right? It's an integer. So it's going to be an integer. So when declaring a tuple, it looks for 2 clues, commas and parentheses. So do you guys see what it might be?
Is it 4 and the fourth one and the last one?
So the last one is correct.
Last one, she said no parentheses.
No, it needs parentheses.
But you said if there's a parenthesis, it will see it as a string.
No, okay. So, sorry. I don't know if that was confusing. So, okay. So, it does see it as a string only if you don't give it a comma. So, now maybe it's working. Yeah, so here, let me delete this. So, here tuple we try to make a tuple and we just said A, that gets recognized as a string. But if I put a comma, now it gets recognized as a tuple. So,
Okay.
yeah, so in that case, this last one is correct.
Correct. Yeah.
So there's one more.
Fourth one.
It's a little tricky. I actually don't think I explained it properly, but the other way.
The second one.
Yeah, so the other way that we see it is the second one. That's correct. The reason why is basically it's the comma that makes the tuple, not the parentheses. And so it is the norm, like usually to put parentheses, but that's not always needed. And I might not have made that clear. That's basically what I was trying to say when I said that if you don't put the comma, then it just thinks that it's an integer or a string, because the parentheses aren't enough to declare a tuple. It's really the comma. So that's why with one element, this makes it very obvious. But if you have more than one element, you're using a comma regardless. So that's why the parentheses end up seeming like they matter more. And then just one final question. What's the main difference between lists and tuples?
The third one.
Is it?
I'll give a hint. One of them is mutable and one of them is not.
One? Is it the
The
second?
fourth one?
I think it's the second one.
Anyone else agree with the second one or fourth one? What do you guys think?
What's a mutable? What's immutable?
So, like I said, mutable means that I can change it. So I can delete an element from it. I can reassign it.
Oh, the second one in that case.
Yeah, perfect. So lists, we can change elements of it. However, in a tuple, you can't, right? So that's what I showed when I try to change one of the elements of the tuple. Correct. So tuples are close, but the only difference between lists and tuples is that tuples are immutable. So like strings, they cannot be changed once they've been created.
And both can hold any data type.
Yes, both can hold any data, string, int, decimals, whatever you want. And we can see that here, like maybe 3, 4.12, hello, like this is all fine. Oh wait, I have to print it. Print 2. See, so that's totally fine, and that's fine in a list too. But yeah, what I was trying to stress is you don't actually need the parentheses. Those aren't mandatory. The only thing that's mandatory is the comma. Sorry if I made that confusing. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, so that's all I have. It's basically 7. Basically, I just wanted to cover tuples and lists and finish strings because those are really important data types. Also, I'm pretty sure this session is recorded, correct? And it is shared on YouTube?
Yes.
And so is the first class. So if you guys did miss the first one, you can access the video that has all the information from the first class. But I can share slides if anyone's interested. You can let me know on WhatsApp or anything. Do you know what the YouTube channel is that has the videos?
I can send you the links. It is KKNY Media. I sent in the group. Are you not in the KKN1 announcement?
I am, but I think some members may not be.
Okay, let me copy it here.
Thank you. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, let me know. I'll stop sharing also.
The only question I have, it is like, uh, did, what is that you are going to achieve in this course, and how long is this course? Is it 3 weeks, 4 weeks? How is that?
I think that my original was 4 classes, so I wanted to spend the next class just finishing up any of the final like data types that I think are really important, and then starting a final project that we work together on, but also it would have to be done independently, and then the last class can be used to sort of go over what everyone was able to accomplish and review what we learned over this time period.
All right, just wanted to announce here, like once this session is done, and if people completes the project, we will issue a certificate saying Python beginners certified something from KK.
Okay, that's great.
So let's do that. The people who are here, who are serious enough to take that, they can register with you and do the project. And then once it is successfully done, you can classify them as the beginner certified for Python from KKNY. So that makes little seriousness on the whole course.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, I think it was a good session. It was very well organized. I'm very impressed with the way you present it and
Thank you.
how you're conducting. I think the initial question was very good to understand the audience with like what's their experience and what is the expectation also out of this whole session was a good question. Probably when we started, we should have put that as a spreadsheet to understand each person.
Yeah, I think I've gotten a better idea, at least from people who've messaged me personally. I've gotten to know them a little bit better. They've told me.
Okay, that's good, great.
Yeah.
So you have a couple of more sessions, and then in the last session, you will let us know who all have qualified in these sessions.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Cool.
And I'll follow up with